Hello dear friends, this is an update to my previous video with my Reaper laptop live setup that I use with my WindSynth. I use a Yamaha WX5, but this will work with a Aerophone from Roland or an Iwi from Akai or a Silfo, also the Birdland new Eevee or new Rad. Any of these WindSynths you can plug into the MIDI and access everything that's in this setup. This is a new laptop since my previous video. It's a Lenovo Flex 5 1570. It's got a Core i7 7500U processor. It's got DDR4 RAM at 2133 megahertz, 16 gig, an NVMe Samsung 500 gig SSD. Also in this picture you can see I have some USB foot switches hooked up to increment and decrement the preset tracks in Reaper. Those are from quietpc.com. And I also have an expression pedal and a sustain pedal hooked up with this, the MIDI Expression Quattro from audiofront.net. Upon getting to the gig, I will take out and unpack all this equipment and set it up like you saw in the picture. And then I'll turn it on, and it has a reasonable boot time. The whole idea behind all this is that you want the laptop to be like a hardware rack of MIDI modules, and you want your boot up time to be somewhat equivalent to what that would be. So now we're booted. Before I run Reaper and load up a project, I first run this other application called Wise Game Booster, which optimizes performance by shutting down various processes and gives you access to system settings which you might not want to permanently change or disable. This is going to be different on every system, and what I did was to run Task Manager while playing through demanding presets, watching to see which processes are fighting for CPU time. And then I would Google Windows 10 and the name of the process and things like audio and latency, and see if it was safe to disable the process and just how to do that. Some things are really easy and only takes a couple steps. Other things are kind of hard, like Windows Defender and Cortana. Those had to have registry editing to take those out. And things can get interesting. On this page here, I end all these processes. Just click them all, ending them all. And you'll notice on the icons on my desktop disappear and reappear. That's kind of scary when that first happened. So proceed with caution. You might not need to do any of this stuff to get what you want to have happening working. I always get roped into it when I'm testing. I always add an extra trombone, one too many, or a saxophone, one too many. And then I fall in love with it in a section and I want to keep it and have to find a way to make it work. So I've run Reaper there, you saw that. I ran it in administrator mode. I don't know if that makes a difference. Does that make a difference? And opening up my recent projects, and you can see different projects for different bands and different versions as I work on projects and add things to them. I'm going to minimize Wise Game Booster to the taskbar here. We don't need to do anything more with it, and it resets everything on shutdown. Okay, so let's pretend I didn't spend all that time talking about all the processes stuff, and let's go right to loading a project. This is project A, and right there you see those two contact loading windows. That's two instances of contact loading really fast, and the way I do that is to set up the contact preload buffer size to just the minimum, and that works really good with the NVMe SSD hard drive, and it takes less RAM as well. Now this project is everything that was in my live WX5 WindSynth Reaper setup video previously, with all the same VSTIs and the same sounds, although I've expanded and layered more things and used more CPU power as much as I can in the presets in their routing. So with the project loaded, I'm ready to play and do a sound check, but I'm going to show you a new thing that I found: Reaper project tabs. You can open multiple tabs and have a Reaper project in each of them. Opening up the second project here, I have a copy of my main project where I've substituted some things and then replaced others. And in this tab, I've added UHE Hive software synthesizer, which is really light on resources, but I like the way it sounds, and it's crazy flexible. In Contact Instruments, I add the Evolution Modern Nylon from Orange Tree Samples. That's a nylon string classical guitar. Also from Orange Tree Samples is the Pure Jazz Vibes vibraphone, and also the Sitardelics sitar. This project also has 14 instances of MIDI chords. Each one loads its own bank of 127 MIDI presets. I was just starting to run out of those on my main project. When you route a preset track to 5 or 6 or more MIDI chords, you have to make sure that they all share the free preset that you want to assign. So with project tabs, it gives you a lot more of those to use. This is not true with UHE Hive and Diva, which each have one MIDI bank that they use with all instances. As you can see, I've opened up a third tab and I'm loading a third project into it. This project features 4 contact instruments. In the first one, I swap in vintage strings and gofriller cello, and in the second one, I swap in the Pettenhouse direct bass and the Chris Hine harmonica, and also the Orange Tree Samples Evolution Jazz Archtop and Evolution mandolin. The third contact has the Evolution rock standard guitar running through Guitar Rig, and the fourth contact has a drum machine, Alicia's Keys piano, Scarby Fender Rhodes, vintage organs, Hammond B3, the shakuhachi flute from Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, and the Mellotron choir. There's also a bank of custom vocoder samples I made for Daft Punk's Get Lucky. I'll demonstrate that later in the video. This final bank is basically a copy of the first bank minus the synthesizers and adding the swam clarinet and bass clarinet. So it's a whole new bank for horn section songs. It seems like without the synthesizers there's a little change in the feel of the latency, but it's hard to tell for sure. Between the laptop throttling for higher CPU loads and Windows 10 snapping from its pretty tight latency to a looser latency on occasion, it was necessary to assign an action key to open up the audio device manager. Then just hitting return closes it, and that resets the latency to former tightness. It doesn't happen often, but that fixes it in a split second. So now all 4 tabs are loaded with their projects. All these instruments and settings are ready to go. I'll just take a quick second to show you one thing up in the tabs here. Right-clicking on the tab on the top here shows the tab settings. Run background projects is not enabled. You only want one tab activated at a time. On this setup, if you had them all running at once, it would crash, but it might work with fewer tabs or maybe less instruments. The tabs are assigned to easy to get to keys so you can switch easily from one to the other. The tracks in each project are aligned so that the hotkeys will open up the project's presets or windows. Numbers 1 and 2 are assigned to contact 1 and 2. Number 3 opens up and turns on Guitar Rig. And then escape out of that and hit 3 again to turn it off. Number 4 opens up Diva, and then there's a whole bunch of keys assigned to the various tracks to select them. Initially testing going between preset tracks quickly, there were still dropouts that would crop up. Turns out there's a setting in Extensions, SWS Options, called Record Enable Input Check, and that's just to let you know when you've selected more than one track for recording. It's not needed in this setup and it just gets in the way. Now this is Reaper 4.31. There's a problem with newer versions of Reaper where something in the routing just doesn't work the same way. Tracks that are routed to instruments wouldn't work, but if you routed to another track and then to the instrument, that would work. A way to get around that is to take these tracks at the left where I have all my instruments loaded up and take the instruments out and then make matching tracks at the very end of the far right of the mixer and insert the instruments there, and then route those original tracks to those new tracks. There's a slight performance hit in doing that, and the newer versions of Reaper didn't really have that much better CPU performance. Now in the category of bugs that really don't get in the way but are still kind of annoying, there's a little thing that goes on when you're switching through tracks really quickly on both the mixer page and the track list page. The display simply can't keep up and it just stops, and then as soon as you stop scrolling, it snaps to the position. It works fine when you're scrolling within what's already displayed, but as soon as you go off that, it does all this crazy stuff. It's still working and you're still scrolling through the tracks, but it's hard to tell where you're at and you have to stop and take a look, and it kind of looks ugly if somebody's looking over your shoulder. And then you find yourself just clicking through one track at a time this way and scrolling within the window where again everything is fine, and then when you get back up to the very top of the page, doing one track at a time again. It's annoying, but it works. You can avoid scrolling pretty much just by assigning hotkeys to select active preset tracks. Okay, so now we can actually look at some of the preset tracks and what they do. One thing I should mention about my preset tracks is that they don't have any of the actual VST instruments on the track that I select. I have a bank of 10 dedicated one VST instrument per each track on the left side, and those are all muted and soloed, so those are all working all the time. And then on the right side of the mixer, likewise also muted and soloed, are 10 individual MIDI chords tracks that are matched up to the 10 VST instrument tracks. So each preset track that I select will either route directly to the instrument or it'll route to the MIDI chords and then directly to the instrument. So let's go to one congas. It's standard. I just press C. That's an action key that takes me to the congas track. So that was percussion on bank 1 or project tab 1. And now I switched project tabs right there, and I went to project tab 3. That's where Get Lucky is located. Now I'll select the Get Lucky track. I use the delete key to take me to the general neighborhood of where that is, and then I use the arrow key to slide down to the exact track of Get Lucky. I use 3 tracks. The first one is the piano, but I use that to send also program change commands. And what I do is I have a MIDI plugin on that track that receives continuous controller, and I have my left-hand palm keys. They don't send notes anymore. They send controllers, 80 and 81. I'll just click that, and then when the plugin receives that, it sends out program change that I have selected. In this case, it selects the piano, it selects the proper MIDI chords, and it also selects a synthesizer patch from Diva. So starting out with the piano. And then a little thicker. And the bottom notes. Now I set that up to let our keyboard player or any keyboard player play the electric piano part if he wanted. It's a lot more fun. It's a kind of a Herbie Hancock thing. So that gives him that option. Otherwise, I can switch back to playing congas or laying out, but here's my congas again. Now notice when I switch banks, project tabs, it plays the tail of the bell tree that I triggered off. What happens when you switch the banks is it just stops where you're at and it goes to the other bank and starts that. And then when you switch back, it stops that bank and goes to where you left off in the first bank. And in that case, the bell tree just kept on playing there. So watch out for that unless you want it to happen. So yeah, then I can play some congas and switch back. And now I'm back where I was. Now I'll switch to the next preset track, which contains the midistep plugin from Insert Pits here. And what that does is it loads in a MIDI sequence, and you trigger off each step of it by playing notes on your controller. I have just the one note, and that's a middle B, and that triggers off each step of the MIDI step sequence. So I'll select that. Also on this track, I have a plugin, or actually a macro key, that turns off and turns on the third plugin in the chain, and that's midistep. And what's nice about that is it resets that when you turn it off and you turn it back on, it resets it to the first step of the sequence. And that makes it so you don't have to worry about getting off by one syllable. So here we go. What up, I'm ready to get. 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 What up, I'm ready to get lucky. What up, I'm ready to get love to get. What up, I'm ready to get lucky. 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 So yeah, it doesn't send any breath controller commands, or it doesn't trigger off any controllers that are in the sequence that I can tell. It just triggers off the notes. And you have to be careful not to stutter, because if you get off by one syllable, it's tricky. And what I did is I have emergency notes, like middle F, I have set to trigger off the sequence from this point. And so on and so on. So that's how that works. And then the only thing that's left for this song is the synthesizer on the end. And that's Diva. So that's Get Lucky. Okay, this is the preset for No Place I'd Rather Be by Clean Bandit. And it's a good one to show off how I use charts. Now, I'll put the chart up on the screen here. If you look at the notes, you'll notice that there's some discrepancies. What I do is, for each note that goes into MIDI chords, it can be mapped out to any note you want on any channel you want. So you can do full orchestrations. And you don't have to have the note that you're playing go through. So you can map any note to any other notes. So what I do is a lot of non-scalar notes, won't fit into the song, wrong notes. I will map, and I'll also map all the octaves. The WX5 and most other WindSynths will give you lots of octaves. Here there's an octave up key, and then when you hold down both these keys, it's another octave up. Then when you hold down just the top key, it's another octave up. And the same applies for going downwards. So if you look at the chart here, if I don't say anything at all, it usually means I'm playing in the middle of the range with no octave keys. And that's how that first section goes. And then after the first couple lines there, you'll see it says top. And what that means is I'm using the top key. And then you'll notice the notes are just almost a straight chromatic scale, except for like the last three notes. It skips a chromatic note there. And that way it makes it smoother than if I tried to play the actual lick. And it uses less keys, kind of. If you try to map things out as they are in the melody, you'll leave out some keys, and that's wasteful. So I try to use all the keys. A lot of times you get to situations where you're running out of keys, and you use everything you can. And that's how that works. The beginning melody is also the same for the next preset, which is I have it on a different bank, but I could have it on the same bank, but it's just convenient to switch quickly. And it's the same line, just on keyboard. And that's the keyboard part. And then the other remaining part is the bottom line there. I have marked one down, and that's just one octave key down to denote the range. And I'll switch to the bank. And that's No Place I'd Rather Be by Clean Bandit. This next preset is for Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die. And I'm going to put both the score and the WindSynth chart up on the screen here for you to look at while I play it through. And for this French horn note, what I do is I hum while I'm playing to give that growl. And then it's back to the James Bond themed thing. But then after that, I switched to cello. And so on and so forth. And then at the end, there's a French horn. And that's Live and Let Die. That was Saturday in the Park by Chicago, and now I quick want to touch on a couple Talking Heads songs, Naive Melody and Burning Down the House. When I got assigned these songs, I only had a couple days to get ready for them, so I grabbed the Arturia Prophet 5 and used the factory bank. That's where all these sounds are. And now later I've translated those onto Yuhi Diva and Yuhi Hive and Albino 3. And on Naive Melody, I add the Passion Flute from Orange Tree Samples. I really like the Passion Flute from Orange Tree Samples. So Naive Melody. And that's that one. And Burning Down the House. Now, if I had to do this song anytime soon, I would program in that guitar lick just for the fun of it at the beginning, that sequence. And what I would try is a MIDI step to load in 2 MIDI sequences, each one with the alternating notes, and then just try and do a trill at the 16th note tempo and see what happens. And maybe program in a couple of emergency ones too. Anyway, I don't have that, so I start at the open with the synth sounds. And then I'll skip to the solo synth thing. Etc. And then on the end is that drone sound. I use Hive for that. Next up is Tower of Power's What is Hip. I use 3 presets on 3 banks for this one. Here's the first preset. And that's the horn section stuff of the main part of the tune. Now I also have a bank, just in case there's no trumpet player sitting in or playing with the band to take the solos. And I have that set up in 2 ways. Either I can just take the solo straight away, or I have it set up where I can switch back to playing some of the horn section parts if there's no horn section or if there's only one horn player. So here's that. Or with the section. And then that does that. And then for the end, I switched to another bank because I've already run out of harmonies on my main first bank. So now I can do a whole another one. And this is for all the ending stuff after the solo. And that's What is Hip. We'll look at one last preset here. It's for Weather Report's Birdland. This is on 4 presets on 4 banks. It's kind of a work in progress, so you'll hear some things come in and out. It's got various instruments. So here's bank, it starts on bank 2. then I switch to bank 3. And so on, and then bank 2 again. And then back to bank 3. And now bank 1. And then bank 4. And that's Weather Report's Birdland. There we go. That's my overview and a bunch of preset examples. I'm going to do more preset examples in the future, cover the interesting presets and go more in depth. But I want to get to my final thoughts here. First of all, Reaper, I want to thank the developers of Reaper. Holy cow, this thing's great. I have more than 200 presets on some of these banks, and it doesn't seem to be any problem at all. I can just keep adding them, and there's no problem. In order to find them, that's the only thing is when you have so many presets, it's like, where did I put that? You can use Track Inspector and just type in the first couple letters of the title and it'll find it for you. That's great. I also want to thank the Reaper design for having the solo override the mute. When I'm selecting tracks, I'm using a macro that mutes all other tracks, and then the selected track is automatically active as in its settings. And having the instruments both muted and soloed, they still work. And so that makes this all work. If the mute overrides the solo, none of this would be happening at all. And project tabs, that was a great thing to find. Now you can have many more banks, and it makes it very easy to switch from doing the horn parts to a synth solo and then back to the horn parts just exactly where you were. That was a very important thing. Otherwise, it was a lot of dancing around to find your presets in songs on stage. I want to thank Standing Water Studios SWS extensions. A lot of the macros and stuff that I use are from them, and that's great stuff also. MIDI chords. The developer Insert Pits here. I really want to thank him again, because holy cow, that's worked out great. I wouldn't have even gotten into it if he hadn't made it able to import the Nuendo quarter presets that I had. That's why I kind of jumped into it. I was like, oh, I can just import them and then I can be going in no time. And sure enough, it worked great. I'm thinking about a new laptop, of course. Now that I've gotten to this point, it's like, oh, how about a little more power? Thinking about maybe an AMD Ryzen, as I see a lot of good things about them. I'd like to hear more from all of you in comments about what you've heard about Ryzen and low latency audio. Things I'm going to keep an eye on this time is the throttling, the thermals. This laptop throttles a lot, so you'll be testing things out at one speed and it'll throttle back to another speed when it gets hot. And you'll have to be careful about that and factor that into your margin of how much you can do and how much you can get away with safely. I want to have the flat screen where it folds back on the music stand. That's really important. I want to get dual channel RAM. I got 16 gigabytes in this guy. I figured that must be 2 channels of 8 gigabytes in dual channel mode, but no, it's not. It's a single soldered 16 gigabyte bank. And so, yeah, it could have been faster if it would have been dual channel RAM. One thing about getting a new laptop that's not so much fun is the hassle of transferring. It'd be great if there's a way to just load a laptop with your current setup exactly as it is, but there's complications in all the ways that attempt that. So it's a matter of, installing everything and configuring it to the way you want, and all these VSTIs and all the sample banks. So that takes a good couple of weeks to do. But I like laptops. I would even if you had hardware, there's a lot of stuff that's not available in hardware, like the MIDI chords. That would be a hard thing to implement in hardware and have it work and have it be easily to work and configure and set up. And the laptop is nice because stage space, it's like, Hammond organ takes up a ton of stage space. Some guys earn it. And, with this setup, you're taking up a single horn player, which is usually the smallest spot on stage. The trumpet player, it's like, they pack 8 horn players into the same stage space as a guitar player or a keyboard player would use. So you got to, this works out great because it's the same space you would use for your music stand. So all that is great. And anyway, I want to thank all my subscribers. Every one of you counts times 1,000 as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to check out more stuff, I recommend my SoundCloud. Go to Tony Ostinato SoundCloud. Can't miss it. And up in the upper right corner are a bunch of links for my charts and my presets and Reaper banks and voice, all sorts of things. So also my Audius and my Bandcamp. And if you want to donate money, if you feel compelled, I don't want to compel you, but if you feel compelled, you can go on to Bandcamp and simply, I have all my songs as $0. You can select what you want to pay. So you could just do a donation that way, purchase a song. And it's the same songs that are available on SoundCloud and Audius, but this way you can get money to me, and it works really well. Some people have done that, and it's like, wow, hey, cool. So anyway, I want to say thanks again to Reaper, everybody, MIDI chords, the subscribers. I'm very happy. Just imagine if you could see a screen roll of credits for all the people who do the plugins and do the coding. So I want to thank, of course, every one of those, because this has been a lot of fun for me, and it's opened up a lot of things. So again, thanks, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.